December 5th, 1914. The whaling station on South Georgia fades into the mist. Ahead lies the Weddell Sea, a maze of pack ice guarding Antarctica. Onboard Endurance, Sir Ernest Shackleton and 27 men chase the last great prize of the heroic age, the first land crossing of Antarctica. They have the best gear, sled dogs, and unbreakable optimism. But the Antarctic is not impressed. It is a place of brutal, indifferent power. 2 days out, they meet the ice. For weeks, the Endurance probes for weaknesses, pushing south through narrow channels of open water. But on January 18, 1915, the ice closes in. A northerly gale compresses the pack, and the ship is trapped, as one crewman wrote, like an almond in the middle of a chocolate bar. They are still a day's sail from their intended landing site. The ice that was their path has become their prison. For 10 months, the ship is a helpless captive, drifting with the pack. Then, the pressure intensifies. The ship's timbers begin to scream, and on October 27th, the ice delivers its final crushing blow. The Endurance is broken. The men are forced onto the frozen sea, a tiny island of humanity in a world of white. This is the story of how 28 men survived for nearly 2 years in the most hostile environment on Earth. No rescue was coming. No one even knew where they were. They had only the supplies they could drag from their dying ship and the skills they possessed. How did every single man survive when they should have all perished? The answer lies in a set of skills that go beyond simple bushcraft. This was a masterclass in leadership, ingenuity, and the absolute refusal to surrender. Tools to trust. Skills that last. This is Bushcraft Arsenal. Number 1. Unwavering leadership and morale management. The single most important survival tool was not gear, it was Shackleton's mind. When endurance was crushed, the expedition failed, but Shackleton redefined success. Bring every man home alive. From the moment of crisis, Shackleton's focus was on the psychological well-being of his crew. He understood that the greatest danger was not the cold or the hunger, but despair. He kept his men busy, establishing a rigid routine of daily tasks. They had watches to stand, ice to clear, and equipment to maintain. This structure provided a sense of normalcy and purpose in a world that had none. He organized football matches on the ice and held sing-alongs in the evenings. He encouraged the men to keep their diaries, understanding that the act of writing was a way of processing trauma and maintaining a sense of self. Shackleton's optimism was relentless and infectious. In public, he never showed a flicker of doubt. He calmly and simply explained the dangers, the possibilities, and his plan. As Surgeon Alexander Macklin wrote, he told us simply and calmly that we must winter in the pack, never lost his optimism. In private, however, he confessed his fears to his captain, Frank Worsley, admitting, "The ship can't live in this, skipper." This ability to project confidence while privately acknowledging the grim reality was the hallmark of his leadership. He absorbed the fear and despair of his men and radiated back hope. He led by example, giving up his own mittens to a man who had lost his, and ensuring that his officers shared the same hardships as the crew. He was a master of conflict resolution, diffusing tensions and managing the diverse personalities of his men. In a situation that could have easily descended into mutiny and madness, Shackleton held his crew together through the sheer force of his will. Every man on that expedition would later credit their survival to the boss. Number 2. Salvage, preparation, and resource management. Before Endurance sank, the crew salvaged everything usable. This was calculated triage. Every item judged on one criterion: would it help them survive? They hauled 3 of the ship's lifeboats, heavy wooden boats weighing over a ton each, onto the ice, knowing these would be their only hope of reaching open water. They salvaged food, fuel, tools, and scientific equipment. But for every item saved, another was sacrificed. Shackleton ordered each man to limit his personal gear to 2 pounds. He himself set the example, throwing away his gold watch and a handful of sovereigns, keeping only a photograph of his wife and a Bible inscribed by the Queen. Anything that added unnecessary weight or consumed valuable resources was left to go down with the ship. This included books, clothing, and even the ship's cat, Mrs. Chippy, who was shot along with the youngest and weakest of the sled dogs. It was a brutal, heartbreaking decision, but a necessary one. In the calculus of survival, sentiment was a luxury they could not afford. This ruthless pragmatism extended to their food. They had salvaged what they could from the ship's stores, but they knew it wouldn't be enough. They began to hunt the seals and penguins that were their only source of fresh meat and, crucially, blubber for fuel. They became expert hunters, and the cook, Charles Green, became a master of blubber stove cuisine, turning the tough, oily meat into a stew they called hoosh. It was a monotonous and often unpalatable diet, but it kept them alive. They ate the dogs, one by one, as they became too weak to pull the sledges. Every part of the animal was used. Nothing was wasted. This meticulous management of their resources, this ability to turn the hostile environment into a source of sustenance, was a critical factor in their survival. Number 3, improvised shelter and campcraft. For 497 days, the men of the Endurance were homeless, adrift on a sea of frozen water. Their survival depended on their ability to create shelter from the wreckage of their old world. Their first camp on the ice, which they named Ocean Camp, was a collection of canvas tents, a fragile barrier against the relentless Antarctic wind. As the ship was slowly crushed, they salvaged wood from its interior, building more substantial shelters and a galley. But their real masterpiece of improvised architecture came after they reached Elephant Island. Elephant Island was a desolate, wind-swept rock, a place of jagged peaks and glaciers. It was a marginal improvement on the ice floe, but it was land. Here, 22 men would have to wait, while Shackleton and 5 others made their desperate journey to South Georgia. To survive the brutal Antarctic winter, they needed a more permanent and robust shelter than their flimsy tents. They turned to the 2 remaining lifeboats, the Dudley Docker and the Stancomb Wills. Under the direction of the expedition's carpenter, Harry McNish, the men turned the 2 boats upside down, placing them on top of 2 low stone walls. They used the masts and oars as roof beams and covered the structure with the canvas from their tents. The result was a low, dark, cramped hut, which they christened the Snuggery. It was about 20 feet long and 10 feet wide, and for 4.5 months it was home to 22 men. The interior was black with blubber smoke, and the men slept on the cold, stony ground. It was a miserable existence, but it was survival. The Snuggery, a testament to their ingenuity and resourcefulness, protected them from the worst of the winter storms, with winds that could reach over 100 miles per hour. It was a symbol of their refusal to surrender to the elements, a defiant statement that they would not just endure, but adapt and overcome. Number 4, open boat navigation and seamanship. The James Caird journey stands as one of history's greatest navigation feats. Shackleton knew no rescue was coming. He made an audacious decision: sail the 22-foot lifeboat 800 miles across the Southern Ocean to South Georgia. With him, he took 5 men, including the ship's captain, Frank Worsley, whose skills as a navigator would be tested to their absolute limit. The James Caird was a small, open boat, never intended for such a journey. The carpenter, McNish, did his best to make it seaworthy, building a makeshift deck from wood and canvas, and sealing the seams with a mixture of oil paint and seal blood. On April 24, 1916, they set off into a maelstrom of wind and waves. For 16 days, they were battered by hurricane-force winds and monstrous waves, some of which they estimated to be 60 feet high. The boat was constantly coated in a layer of ice, which threatened to capsize them. They had to crawl out onto the icy deck with axes to chip it away. They were wet, cold, and seasick, and they had to bail constantly to keep from being swamped. Through it all, Worsley, the navigator, had to find their position. He had only a sextant and a chronometer, and he had to take his sightings from a boat that was being thrown about like a cork. He had only 4 opportunities to get a clear sight of the sun. If he had been off by even a single degree, they would have missed south. Georgia had been lost in the vastness of the Atlantic. On May 10th, after 16 days of unimaginable hardship, they sighted land. They had done it. They had crossed 800 miles of the world's worst ocean in a small, open boat. It was a miracle of navigation and seamanship, a testament to the skill, courage, and sheer bloody-mindedness of the 6 men who had refused to be beaten by the sea. Number 5. Mountaineering and Improvisation. The journey of the James Caird was a triumph, but their ordeal was not over. They had landed on the uninhabited west coast of South Georgia. The whaling stations, their only hope of rescue, were on the east coast. Between them lay a range of uncharted, glacier-covered mountains. No one had ever crossed them before. Shackleton, Worsley, and one other man, Tom Crean, were about to attempt it with no climbing gear, no tent, and no sleeping bags. They had only a length of rope, a carpenter's adze for an ice axe, and screws from the boat hammered into their boots to serve as crampons. They were exhausted, dehydrated, and on the brink of starvation. For 36 hours they marched non-stop, navigating by the moon and stars. They climbed peaks and crossed glaciers, the rope that tied them together, a fragile lifeline in a world of crevasses and icefalls. At one point, with the fog closing in and darkness falling, they found themselves on a high ridge, with a steep, icy slope below them. They had no time to go around. Shackleton made a decision that was either brilliant or insane. They would slide. They coiled the rope, sat down on it, and pushed off, tobogganing 1,500 feet down the mountainside in a matter of minutes. It was a desperate gamble, a leap of faith into the unknown, but it worked. They arrived at the bottom, shaken but alive. They continued their march, and finally, after 36 hours of non-stop effort, they heard a sound they had not heard in almost 2 years, a steam whistle from the whaling station at Stromness. They had done it. They had crossed the mountains. They had reached civilization. This final, desperate march was a testament to their ability to improvise, to adapt, and to push their bodies and minds to the absolute limit. It was a fitting end to a journey that had been defined by its challenges and by the indomitable will of the men who had refused to be defeated by them. Number 6. Hunting and foraging in a frozen world. For nearly 2 years, the men of the Endurance were cut off from all sources of food except for what they could take from their immediate environment. The Antarctic is the world's largest desert, a place of stunning beauty and profound emptiness. But for those with the skills and the patience, it can also be a source of sustenance. The crew's survival depended on their ability to hunt the seals and penguins that were the only inhabitants of their frozen world. They became expert hunters, stalking the seals that basked on the ice floes and the penguins that congregated. In their vast, noisy colonies, they used rifles to take down the seals and clubs to kill the penguins. It was a brutal, bloody business, but it was a matter of life and death. Every part of the animal was used. The meat was their primary source of protein. The blubber was their fuel, used for cooking and for warmth. The skins were used for clothing and for patching their worn-out boots. Even the sinews were used as thread. The diet was monotonous and often unpleasant. Penguin meat was dark and oily, and the men grew tired of the constant taste of seal. But it was food, and it kept them alive. They learned to cook the meat in a way that made it more palatable, stewing it for hours in a pot with a little water and whatever else they could find. This hoosh was the staple of their diet, a thick, greasy stew that provided the calories they needed to survive the intense cold. They also learned to forage for the few edible plants that grew on the rocky shores of Elephant Island. They found a type of seaweed, which they boiled and ate, and a few species of lichen. It wasn't much, but it provided a welcome change from the constant diet of meat, and it may have provided some of the vitamins and minerals that were lacking in their diet. This ability to live off the land, to turn the hostile environment into a source of life, was a fundamental skill that underpinned their entire survival story. Number 7. Medical care and hygiene in extreme conditions. In the Antarctic, minor injuries could become fatal. Surgeons Alexander Macklin and James McElroy kept men alive, working in primitive conditions. They had to deal with a range of medical issues, from frostbite and snow blindness to broken bones and infected wounds. They performed surgery on the ice using a makeshift operating table and sterilized instruments. They amputated the toes of one man who had severe frostbite, an operation that almost certainly saved his life. They treated the men for seasickness, dysentery, and the constant debilitating effects of cold and hunger. But their most important work was in the area of preventative medicine. They understood the importance of hygiene, even in a world where everything was frozen and filthy. They insisted that the men wash their hands before eating, and that they keep their living quarters as clean as possible. They inspected the men's feet for signs of frostbite, and they made sure that everyone had adequate clothing and shelter. They also played a crucial role in preventing an outbreak of scurvy, the disease that had plagued so many earlier polar expeditions. They knew that a diet of fresh meat was the key to preventing scurvy, and they made sure that everyone ate their share of seal and penguin meat even when they were sick of the taste. This attention to medical care and hygiene was a critical factor in the crew's survival. It is a testament to the skill and dedication of the two doctors and to the discipline of the men themselves that not a single man was lost to illness or injury during the entire 2-year ordeal. It is a remarkable achievement and a powerful reminder of the importance of medical knowledge in any survival situation. Number 8. Decision-making under extreme pressure. Throughout the ordeal, Shackleton faced life-or-death decisions. His ability to make the right call under pressure was his greatest skill. He made the decision to abandon the ship, knowing that it was doomed. He made the decision to abandon the march across the ice, recognizing that it was a futile and dangerous effort. He made the decision to wait for the ice to drift north, a passive strategy that required immense patience and faith. He made the decision to launch the boats when the ice finally broke up, a moment of decisive action that saved them from being swamped. He made the decision to sail for Elephant Island, a small remote target in a vast and stormy sea. He made the decision to leave 22 men behind and sail for South Georgia, a desperate gamble that was their only hope of rescue. And he made the decision to cross the mountains of South Georgia, a final audacious push for survival. Each of these decisions was made with a clear head, a calm demeanor, and a deep understanding of the risks and possibilities. Shackleton was a master of risk management. He was not a reckless adventurer. He was a calculated gambler who knew when to be patient and when to be bold. He listened to the advice of his officers, but the final decision was always his. He took responsibility for the lives of his men, and he carried that burden with a strength and a grace that is almost superhuman. This ability to make good decisions under extreme pressure is a rare and valuable skill. It is a combination of experience, intuition, and a deep understanding of the human element. Shackleton had all of these things in abundance. He was a leader who inspired confidence, a man who could be trusted to make the right call, even when the stakes were at their highest. His decision-making was the thread that held the entire survival story together, the invisible hand that guided them through the darkness and back into the light. Number 9. The indomitable will to survive. The endurance story is about human will. 28 men refused to give up, pushed to the absolute limit. They held on to hope, dignity, and humanity. This indomitable will to survive was not just a matter of individual courage. It was a collective spirit, a bond of brotherhood that was forged in the crucible of shared hardship. They were a team, and they looked out for each other. They shared their food, their clothing, and their last scraps of comfort. They encouraged each other, they supported each other, and they refused to let each other fail. This sense of community, this belief that they were all in it together, was a powerful force that sustained them through the darkest of times. Shackleton himself was the embodiment of this spirit. He was the rock on which they all depended, the man who never lost faith, who never gave up. His famous family motto was, "By endurance we conquer," and it was a motto that he and his men lived by every single day of their 2-year ordeal. They endured the loss of their ship, the long, dark winter on the ice, the perilous journey in open boats, and the final desperate march across the mountains of South Georgia. They endured it all, and they conquered. On August 30th, 1916, the 22 men on Elephant Island saw a ship, the Yelcho, with Shackleton on deck. He had returned. Every single man survived, a miracle and testament to their unbreakable will. The story of the Endurance is more than just a survival story. It is a lesson in leadership, in teamwork, and in the power of the human mind to overcome even the most impossible of odds. It is a story that has inspired generations of explorers, adventurers, and anyone who has ever faced a challenge that seemed insurmountable. It is a story that reminds us that as long as we have hope, as long as we have courage, and as long as we have each other, we can endure anything. What do you think was the most critical factor in the survival of the Endurance crew? Was it Shackleton's leadership, the skill of the men, or just sheer dumb luck? Let me know in the comments below. And for more stories of survival against all odds, be sure to check out our video on the incredible journey of Oguri Jukichi, the man who survived for 484 days adrift at sea. See you in the next episode.